And there we are. So bear with us for a moment while we get people to join as they come into the room. And then we'll go ahead and get started on yet another watch party. This time we are on Charlie X, which ironically is one of the earliest episodes filmed. I believe we're actually even going to see Michelle Nichols in Command Gold in this instead of the typical engineering red or communications red. Science is red, I guess. No, science is for blue. But
science is blue, yeah.
So, all right, we had a few people coming in the door. It's probably going to be a little bit light because I've been a little bit, or more than a little bit, off schedule the past 2 months. So when people do actually even see these things scheduled, they're probably wondering, well, will he or won't he? Is you just screwing around with us again? But for those of you joining or getting ready to watch this on the replay, this is a watch party, which means that about maybe 10 to 15 minutes after the top of the call, we then open up another window and bring it on the screen here. And it begins to play a Star Trek episode. Now, in order to keep CBS happy and myself out of jail, we cannot play actual real video because, of course, that is rebroadcasting of a licensed work, which, believe it or not, is actually a heavier copyright slap than using copyrighted footage in a normal video without permission. There's just this whole thing about rebroadcasting, and I think it probably dates back to the laws that were enacted to keep sports bars from paying for WrestleMania and then even the Super Bowl, and then showing it publicly to patrons so that they didn't have to go in and buy it.
Right.
So for those of you who are not terribly happy with a series of screenshots every 30 seconds, you can go to watch.trek-world.com, and that'll take you to Pluto, which will then immediately bring up today's episode for you automatically. You don't need to subscribe to Pluto. You don't even need to have an account with Pluto. If it prompts you to do something, just simply say no, thank you, cancel, whatever, plays the video anyhow. You will be watching the remastered version on Pluto, which means there'll be some commercial breaks, and the original visual effects are not in it. The screenshots that we're taking at 30-second intervals for the episode will be of the original series unremastered with all the shots, but because it is a 31 every 30-second screenshot, don't get your hopes up about seeing a shot of the Enterprise in orbit that you haven't seen in a long time. I'm amazed, Roger, at the number of people that think they know the original effects.
Right.
Then get involved in conversations with myself or others on the comments, which clearly shows that not that they don't know it, but that, like many of us who are in our later years, maybe our memory isn't as good as we thought.
Right.
And I mean, when I did the video on the Klingon battlecruiser, the two studio models, and how they were created and when they were first used, I told everybody which episodes they showed up in. And I would have to say, if you go and you look at the comments on that video, there's at least like maybe 24 people who over and over again tell me, Jim, you forgot one. It's like, it was shown in The Trouble with Tribbles. It's like, no, it wasn't. They go, yes, it was. They saw it in The Trouble with Tribbles. And then I have to point out to them,
that's the remaster.
It wasn't around at that point.
Right.
When they remastered it, the remasters, and I think maybe this is what catches some people off guard, is I think that maybe they don't realize that these visual effects in the remasters are not shot for shot with the original episode. They're completely new imaginations and new camera angles, but everything was done to make them more cinematic when they were created.
Right.
And so they may even think to themselves that I saw it in the remaster, but
Right.
hey, that it was there. All they did was cover it up with CGI. But no, in the original episode, they didn't. And so it's really interesting when I get into certain videos where I go into where the original effects have disappeared to. The people have different memories of that.
Exactly. Yeah, I've seen that too on the comments and things, and and then I find myself having to go back and go, wait a minute, my memory's getting fuzzy now, having watched both the original effects and the remasters. I'm having to check myself. Was it actually in? No, it wasn't. I didn't think it was, but I wanted to check before I responded. So
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm doing a series. I stopped after about four, but I'm going to be doing more of them. I can do them in a batch, but I've been doing a series recently of very short videos, maybe 2 minutes long each, and where I show you every one of the original clips of the Enterprise in the
right,
original episode. Now, for those who've been on the channel long enough to know, I have Cuisinarted those things so many times. There's the original shot library where I show you, okay, this is every shot ever made, and then this shot was used in the following episodes, and
right,
and then at the end I come up with a tally of how the most effects laid, the most images of the Enterprise in a single episode. Doomsday Machine, no big surprise for
right,
that. So I've done it that way. And then I've gone in and I've said, okay, well, here is what the original effect looked like, and here's what the remake looks like. And in some cases, that's been by like show or by season. And now these little one-off things here where I'm showing people the individual episodes. I probably, at some point, when I'm about halfway done with those, will go back and also make a longer video. It'll be about an hour long with all the footage in it, but it'll be all of the original footage Enterprise shots
nice,
that were in every episode. So it'll basically be a compilation of all of these little 2-minute video clips,
right,
all in one longer video with a voiceover on the bottom to say, hey, this is from Charlie X. This is from Where No Man Has Gone Before. But as of this right now, nobody's ever done that before.
no,
There is not a single repository that you can go to anywhere and say, show me everything that they replaced with CGI. Just show it all to me at once. And that's never
right,
been done.
right.
Now, of course, I haven't been moving fastest as I've heard recently. So for those of you who want to like poach that idea, you might actually have the opportunity to by the time we get to it. Well, my hope is to have it in place before we go, before we commence Wonderfest at the end
Yes.
of May.
Yep.
What do you think about what were you looking forward to Wonderfest, Roger?
Yeah. Oh gosh, yes. Yeah. It was last year was just it was beyond belief. Getting to hang out with you, Jim, and your lovely wife, and Michael and David. I mean, some of the Patreon folks. I mean, it's just it was beyond amazing. It really was. Looking forward to it again. So, and I was going to point out 1987. I made that comment about time to get our faces removed again, and I have to admit, as a kid watching those in syndication in the 70s, that scene of all the scenes of what he does to people throughout the episode, that one creeped me out the most. And it's a relatively simple effect, but I mean, it just creeped me out. It reminded me of like some of those store mannequins that they used to have back in the day that weren't as highly detailed as they are now, where they were just basically a body to put the clothes on, and there was no facial features at all. And that's what it reminded me of. Just creeped me out.
Yeah, I remember seeing it too. It is one of the. It was definitely an Outer Limits moment. It felt
Yes,
very
yeah,
much like Outer Limits.
that's a great
And
point. Yeah,
maybe that was Justman's input into the way that scene was shot,
could be.
because it was even like a classical type of horror type thing. Because I think you don't really realize what happens to her at first
Right.
until she maneuvers into the camera frame, and I could
Well,
be
then,
wrong, but isn't even in the Twilight Zone movie the one about the little boy that everybody's terrified
Yes.
of. I think the same thing happens in
I
that. Now,
think
that,
yes.
now the movie, of course, it was a remake of an earlier episode in the Twilight Zone, which
Yes. Right.
probably means, and I've never considered that before, but it probably means that, Justman, especially coming from Outer Limits,
Yep.
that was a trope they pulled on. It's like, hey,
Yeah.
this was a very easy thing to film for the original Twilight Zone.
Right.
Um, so therefore, it's got to be, it's not a whole lot of makeup involved. We already know we can do it. But I never thought about that until we
I
just.
neither. No. And then, like you said, lady making the sounds. I mean, yeah, that was even creepier. Not only did she not have a face, but hearing her muffled, sounds is wow, creepy.
Yeah,
Creepy Star
because
Trek.
the implication is okay. The mouth,
Yeah.
vocal cords, all that's still there. Her nose, her breathing pattern. I mean,
Yeah.
this episode, I have to admit, yeah. And who was it that said it first? Hold on, I'm checking
Yeah.
back through here because okay, it was Red Shirt Bob. Oh, hi, Red Shirt Bob. By the way,
Hey, Red Shirt Bob.
I've been trying to put everybody up at the earliest part here, and everybody can see what you guys are saying. It was he that first mentioned that it scared him as a child,
Yeah.
and I don't think I've had that thought. Oh, it scared me as an adult at all until he mentioned it, and it took me right back in time.
Yep. Me too. Me too.
It's like smelling a Yankee candle. It just takes you right back
Yes.
in time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I love this stuff. Okay.
But too, I was going to throw in there Robert Walker Jr., who plays Charlie. His dad was a famous actor, Robert Walker. And if you see pictures of them side by side, they're almost he's a spitting image of his dad. Really, really is, and wonderful actor. He went on to do so many other things after this episode of Star Trek. So, yeah, just an amazing actor and artist. He was also an artist afterwards. So,
I remember, was it Red Shirt Bob? I remember hoping she survived like Yeoman Rand. Well, you can look on the bright side, Red Shirt Bob. She managed to escape the ignominious fate that happened to Yeoman Rand in the Enemy Within. So,
oh, was it the Thalasians? Is that who was it that Charlie was raised by Thalosians or something like that? And I think at the very end, when they're on the bridge and the Thalosians come to get Charlie, the guy mentions everything is as it was. So everybody's been restored on the Enterprise, but he does mention that they cannot restore the original ship. I'm trying to think of the name of it. It escapes me now.
yeah, the Aurora?
But yeah. Huh?
Was this the Aurora?
Yes, I think it was the Aurora. Maybe.
When they upgraded the effects the entire series, I was happy to hear that. I didn't miss the original effects before the upgrade. I was impressed with them. So yeah, everybody gives the CGI effects a hard time, but I think we need to take the look at them in the context of why they were created.
Right.
Star Trek has always had this thing about it that ties its promotions, it ties its introductions to major commercial events.
Right.
1966, first year, every network was broadcasting in full color. Who owned NBC? RCA.
Yeah.
Who had the most profit from television sets in color that year? RCA. So you knew RCA was handpicking TV shows and color palettes. Rowan Martin's Laugh-In with all the flowers and stuff.
Yep.
They were specifically trying to make the colors pop.
Right.
All these years, we still use that phrase. Along comes the year 2000, and now we have HDTV, which is now available in 1080p at that point. Mm-hmm. And more importantly, we had the Second World War of video formats. You had HD DVD by Toshiba, and you had Sony with Blu-ray.
Yep.
And Toshiba developed a version of a high-res format that was far more studio friendly. And as a result, Star Trek was tapped immediately by the powers that be to say, okay, we need now to re-release remastered copies of everything. Don't leave it. The DVDs that were remastered, but none of the original opticals have been removed. That's like half and half. That was sort of like when we did the Cage, both half in black and white and half in color. We need now a complete soup to nuts, and we'll push this out as one of the flagship products of the HD DVD line. So they signed up Paramount to do Star Trek, and they signed up Steven Spielberg, and they got guarantees from both Paramount and Spielberg that no one would be able to get the competing format. They were locked in here. Didn't work out that all well for either of them, unfortunately, in the long run. But when you look back to when they created that disc, go back and think about when you hadn't seen a Blu-ray yet, and we hadn't seen HDVD. We always saw was DVDs at that point.
Right.
It was amazing.
Absolutely.
I've always been surprised they haven't updated it, though, because while I realize that trying to reprocess yet again the live action parts isn't worth the juice isn't worth the squeeze. I don't think it's going to make that much difference. Later on, if they want to try it at 8K, then God bless them.
Right.
But they can replace those CGI parts in a second.
Yeah.
They're completely edit in, edit out. No, just new renderings. We've seen people do it on YouTube. They kind of say, "Here's my thing in there." All right. So I'm just to let everybody know and remind you again, I'm going to get ready to start the episode now. The episode is Charlie X. Watch.trek-world.com will take you to it on the internet. Alternatively, welcome to Mystery Science Theater 0,000. We've got it here on the screen. It's going to basically do an update as soon as I start it. So let me go ahead and do that. You see the seconds count down in the bottom. Every 30 seconds or so, it's going to do a screen shot that will jump ahead. And that gives us an opportunity to talk about some of the things that we see in the episode. Right. This gentleman in front that was wearing red, I don't know why, but for whatever reason, just looking at that, maybe because the picture was blurry of him, he reminded me of Colm O'Brien on Next Gen in Deep Space Nine. This is our first view, I think, in the aired episodes that not everybody had the same command insignia. Now, of course, I think the deal here, though, these guys, I think, are merchants. I don't think they were Starfleet.
Yeah, and it's interesting. They're wearing, if I'm not mistaken, they're wearing the original uniforms from Where No Man's Gone Before.
So it looks like, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Repurposed.
Yep. Yeah, because the thicker collars and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yep. And then what appears to be thicker material as well.
I wonder what they used in the in that.
It almost looks like velour or something like that. I don't know. It's but yeah, it's they were even in the original series, they used very tight collars on all the uniforms, which I think made it look great. But even Kirk, Spock, McCoy, they all had really tight collars on their made it look very professional. The Antares, yes. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. I knew it started with an A. Got to get some partial credit, right?
The more I kept sitting and thought about it, I'm thinking Aurora doesn't sound right, though. I can't, but it starts with an A.
That is SWAT. You nailed it. And by the way, SWAT, thanks for joining us tonight.
Phasians.
I think we may have seen you before. If not, then welcome. Glad you join us here on this. This is the ending of this that he just snapshotted right there. That's one of those key pillars that I love about Star Trek, when it can show us basically Greek tragedy. And I also want to think that I have a wagon train commercial filming in my living room. I want to think that I think this is one of the scenes, because he never got a chance to see them until 1969, that James Blish really turned up the emotion in that scene.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was
And I
cool.
love that Kirk's line, he asks, "Is that a girl?" And Kirk's like, "That's a girl." You know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. It is.
Yes. Yep. Totally agree, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do.
But I wonder if don't the Merchant Marine here, the real life Merchant Marine, I mean, they use the insignias might be different if they have them at all, but I think like when you go on like cruise ships and stuff, I think they use the same ranks there too.
Yeah,
And I think they wear them. But I don't know. I mean,
yeah.
"1987, you nailed it, my friend." Captain Troy says, "No thanks, bye."
Oh no.
That I love that, Oliver. I need to find that song and just sound clip that every now and then. So that because unfortunately, if you follow the channel here, it is I leave my studio door open when I do these because the dogs want to freely come and go. Otherwise, they'll sit there and they'll whine and dig at the door when I'm in here. So, but unfortunately, every now and then they decide they want to perform for you. Yep. I think it's time we feed them. Otherwise, they'll likely eat the Avon lady or something.
Kind of like my kindergarten teacher talking to my new first grade teacher.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the reference to the nope, they're all yours.
Yep.
What's really interesting though is when Charlie makes them disappear, the implication emotionally is they just, it's like, it's the implication emotionally to me is exactly what McCoy says in Star Trek 2. What if they went nowhere?
Right.
And so it was good to see them bring some of them back, to bring them back.
Although, I gotta
Yeah.
love Kirk's response to that though in Star Trek 2. Well, this is your big chance to finally get away from it.
Yeah.
Something to that effect, but yeah, it's
There are certain things that Jim just cannot pass on when he just wants to be a jerk about it. Although I think that I think they did that particular little scene that really was based on McCoy's not trusting transporters.
Yeah.
That's even before you consider beaming him inside a planet.
Right.
I think they handled that little paranoia with McCoy far better than they handled it in Star Trek's motion picture.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's a scene, Jim, coming up here, and I know we've all seen it before. Actually, I think they've passed it already. But, there's a scene where Charlie's walking through the corridors watching the crewmen.
Is he running?
Huh?
He looks like he's running to catch her.
Yeah, he is. He is.
Yes, okay, yeah.
But there's a scene where he's walking along, and there's a crewman standing there, and he's pulling a line down from the ceiling, and there's a hole in the floor, and it's going down into the floor, and Charlie gets down on one knee looking down into that hole, and it makes me wonder if they had to do any kind of a special elevated set, because obviously they had to have a place for that. It's easy to do stuff above, but you got to have something, some space down below for that PVC pipe to go down through there. So I've always wondered about, every time I watch this episode, I wonder about that.
And I think that I stumbled across it in one of my behind the scenes stuff that I was researching once, because I think there's an episode where we see somebody coming up a ladder from below.
Yes. Yeah.
And so the same thing, it was like, well, wait a minute. There's no way that the set in that area could have been flat on the ground then in order for that to happen.
Right.
And I think the answer I got back from the production people was, well, no, actually, the entire set was actually a few inches up off the floor.
Okay.
So, so they could run, the gaffers could run whatever they needed to for cables and lights and stuff like that if they had to. And that in those particular circumstances, that they were able to actually pass something through the floor. Now, the ladder thing, that implies that it had to be more than just a few inches off the floor.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that might have been a one-off.
Yeah.
I seem to remember reading somewhere like that the ladders that it was always like the same section, and they just changed out the panels that were beside it and stuff like that,
Right.
so that it would look like it was two different sections.
Well, too, in the Doomsday Machine, when Kirk and the landing party end up on the Constellation, Scotty and two or three of the other repairmen, go to the ladder and they climb down, and they're climbing down, and then Scotty later on, Scotty gives a report. Scotty comes climbing back up the ladder. So yeah, that happens in several episodes, as I recall.
Okay. So SWAT brings out a good question. Wonder which one who wins, Charlie Evans or Lieutenant Commander Gary Mitchell? That's very interesting because my thought would be, at the point that we meet both of them, Charlie would, not because he was inherently stronger, but that he had been dealing and working with these powers, living amongst the people that gave him to him all of his life.
Yep.
And whereas Gary, he was just discovering the things that he could do. There were probably things that he had no idea he could do. Right. It was the same thing sort of happened in comics. There was this big conversation maybe about 15 years ago when they were rebooting. It might have been for the New 52 for DC, I'm not sure, but they rebooted everybody. And the question came up, well, who would have been stronger, Superman or Supergirl? And because, she grew up, he grew up under, a yellow sun, so he's been exposed longer than she has. Therefore, he's as a solar battery, he's absorbed more. But then the reciprocal argument was, but he's also spent his entire life deliberately dialing down his abilities so as not to hurt people or to do things that are destructive.
Right.
So he literally pulls every punch. And so, so that was something that was I think for the first 2 years was something that they bantered back and forth in the comic books about. And I think that they at different times landed on both sides of the page. And then the stories morphed. I mean, the New 52 isn't new anymore, and now we're doing something else.
Correct. Yeah.
This is one. Seeing her like this just drives a dagger in the heart even more about what she thought she had, what she deserved to get, and what actually happened to her, and what happened to her as a result of events on the soundstage. Right. And this was supposed to be, she was the big three. It was her, Spock, and Kirk were the primaries. And the 90% of the pre-publicity shots had her in them, her with Nimoy, her with Shatner, all three of them together. And that quickly, not even 8 episodes.
Right. Yep. This is an interesting scene, though, where you get to see a lot more of the lounge area in this episode than you do in a lot of them. You get to see, there's a screen on the wall, obviously behind us there, or behind them, and then you see a lot more of the chairs. Just more of the lounge area than what's normally shown in most episodes.
I wonder what, I'm sure somebody on here knows this. I wonder do they redress like the briefing room and pull out walls for it? Or what do you think they did to show us the rec room sets like this?
Yeah, I don't know, because I mean, honestly, I've never seen the rec room mentioned anywhere, in the production stuff, I'm
sure it's probably one of the things that Cawley and Shatner and whoever does the tours up at Ticonderoga point out from time to time.
Right.
And maybe somebody who's been there might be able to chime in on it. But I'm thinking most certainly it's a redressed set somehow.
Yeah.
It's just much larger. And, because we see it as the rec room. But like in The Trouble with Tribbles, we also see it with food replicators on the wall.
Well, and actually, and I'm sorry, Jim, I didn't mean to cut you off. Actually, in Journey to Babel, when all the delegates are in,
it's like it's huge.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. Another interesting shot or thing to notice when next time you watch that episode, when they walk into the rec room and the camera pans back, you see the table with all the bottles on it and the food. When you look at the floor, there's like that blue indoor-outdoor carpeting, and you see masking tape X's on the floor all over the place. And they're highly visible in the episode, and obviously that's where the actors were supposed to stand for certain times in that shot. So
I've actually caught that in a couple of the blooper videos I've done, the analysis videos where I go, and dig into them.
Yep.
I've seen in 2 or 3 occasions, you can clearly see where the tape is telling them, go stand here.
Right.
So yeah, Michael and Redshirt Bob both said that it looks like it's the briefing room that's dressed for the rec room, the chapel. Okay, so now I have a larger one for you, because I'm thinking this might have been a one-time build-out, and it might have taken place on the planet stage. But where do you think they shot the external scenes of the Galileo sitting in the shuttle bay when the live actors come out of it? When Kirk and company are waiting there, and in comes Serac off the Galileo. I mean, that, you're talking about huge. That is just huge.
Yes.
That room, that model there's no forced perspective. Well, actually there is, because it's a 3/4 model. But the point is that model, being the size it was, had to be significantly far away from where the cameras were at the doorway that supposedly saw back there. And if I remember correctly, there's like no features on the walls whatsoever.
Actually, there isn't behind the Galileo itself, but if you look up above, you can just see they replicated that little catwalk or whatever lighted catwalk above the side there. You could just see it.
The observation walk that we see in
yes,
the King.
Yes, but that's the only thing they replicated. You're right. The rest of the wall is just blank behind the Galileo. Yeah.
So hopefully maybe somebody can chime in on that and let us know.
Yeah. I would think it would have to have been on the same set as the other sets, or they moved those sets to another soundstage just for that scene.
Yeah, Michael says that it had to be on the planet set. There was no room, which is true. I mean, we've seen that in regular soundstage. I don't, so I guess it would have had to be stage.
Yes.
Mine was the original stage. There was another stage right beside it that they used. I don't know if it was 10 or 8, but yeah, it had to be the other one.
Yeah.
I just never really thought about it.
I didn't either. Yeah. But that's one of those times.
These are the things that keep me awake at night.
That's one of those great continuity things that we don't always stop to think about. Some of the level of detail, obviously there's certain episodes where there's things that escaped the scrutiny of when they were doing the dailies, and they missed something ended up, microphone boom pops into the shot briefly for a second, fraction of a second or whatever. But then there's other times like that when we don't always appreciate when the continuity was spot on, until later.
So Slot's got an interesting question. What if the board tried to assimilate Charlie Evans? Or would Charlie Evans have the ability to resist or destroy the Borg?
Interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting, because I think he would have the ability to prior to the assimilation. But once he's assimilated by the nanites, he no longer has control of what he does.
Right.
But the question is, how quick does that happen? I think the way we saw it in First Contact implies that he probably would have had enough time.
Right.
Because we saw them, injecting nanites into Starfleet officers, the crew members, to assimilate them as they were spreading throughout the ship. And it wasn't like instant. It looked like it took, at least a minute, 2 minutes or whatever.
Right.
And so the only difference is I don't know whether Charlie would recognize the danger in order to determine, I need to make this go away.
Right.
That's
or at what point
really
would he?
Good what if SWAT cat. It's really good.
Yeah.
Is this the scene that ends up with the melted chess pieces?
Yes.
It's the small things in life that bring us joy.
And that was one of the effects that I, as a kid, I'm always like, well, heck, that's an easy one. They just took a propane, or a propane torch, and just melted them, because they're just plastic or whatever, cast, injection molded or something.
That is so crazy that you can't help but wonder if anybody even associated with the series, Gene or anyone else, is never forget, Gene was always thinking about how can I make money. Right. But did anybody have any clue that the three-dimensional chess set would obsess so many people over the remaining decades? I remember, I think it was Franklin Mint selling one for like $2,000 on a subscription program or something like that.
Yep. I've seen them recently, as a matter of fact. Somebody had them for sale, and I don't recall where I've seen them at. But yeah, and they were extremely affordable, maybe $150, $200 maybe or something. So I don't know what the quality was like. And that's the other thing with Star Trek props. I mean, you can go all the way to the extreme and get the great quality stuff, or you can get the kind of cheaper knockoffs of it that are, less expensive, but they're also not quite as accurate. So, there's Manly. Hey, Manly.
Hey, Manly. Yeah, thank you. See, I'm reading them and I put it on the screen, but I didn't even get a chance to see the name yet.
Great to hear from you.
We've been worried about you. It is
yes,
so
we have.
good
Wonder
to see
what happened to you.
Because you ghosted us right around the time that the Palisades fires broke out.
Yeah, exactly.
Which also I haven't seen him here, but I know that I did mention it in an earlier live stream. Paul knew it is fine. Because Paul, I lost touch with Paul immediately when the Palisades fires happened. I was able to verify. I was able to check with everybody else to make sure that anybody that I knew, wasn't displaced like that. And Paul lives about 90 minutes outside of LA now. I didn't know that. But for those of you who may have heard me wonder in an earlier live stream, yes, Paul and I have since spoken. One of his social media accounts has been compromised, and unfortunately, the timing just sucked.
Well, Paul, if you're watching, we're so glad that you're okay and weren't involved in the fire. So. Kirk, in this scene, Kirk seems like a typical dad when he gets asked about the first time about the birds and the bees by one of his kids or something. He's delicately trying to.
Yeah, it's about as awkward as it can get. Any of us that had to do that with our kids, it's not a pretty point. It was not a pretty scene.
Right.
And it's all on our side. They're completely unaware. So we're the ones who feel like, oh my God.
Yep, absolutely.
I have to admit, we just went from a snapshot of Shatner and Charlie Evans there, or Kirk and Charlie Evans. You have to give credit where credit is due on Shatner in the earliest part of his career, and really right up through the movies, I think. But he was the perfect leading man.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
mean,
Agreed.
he was attractive, and he appeared to have self-confidence, and so many of us right there, so many of us identified a role model in
Right.
Captain Kirk, when the reality was it was Bill Shatner who was inspiring us to that, and
Yep.
engendering that feeling with us.
Well,
And I don't think anybody, period, has ever come close to that in Star Trek.
no.
Um, a second, but probably as much as to say it'd be a distant second, is the feelings that Anson Mount inspires in me as far as a role model. It's like
Yes.
that is the kind of leader you would want to be.
Yep.
Um, Still, it's what you would expect. Whereas Kirk really seemed to excel in that.
Yep.
Shatner really, really shined in that.
Shatner seems to be extremely comfortable in his own skin in the original series. He seemed like one of those actors that could felt comfortable doing just about anything they had him do. And he always looked good doing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
He was the perfect. You're right. He's the perfect leading man. Very comfortable, strong, silent type for the most part, and just a typical leading man back in the day.
he also showed, to me at least, especially in the 70s, which were his egg salad years, I think he called them, um, where quite often he was hired or asked to do things that were somewhat of a caricature of Captain
Yes.
Kirk.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they would ask him things like, "Oh, we'd like you to come to Hollywood Squares, but we really want you to be on the week where we do the fantasy Hollywood Squares, so that you can dress up as Captain Kirk
Right.
and pretend to be Captain Kirk there in whatever square he was with his little phaser and stuff." I remember quite a few. I have a few
Right.
photographs up in Pinterest. Um, and when they shot Horror at 30,000 feet, they did what I thought was an incredibly um, subtle Easter egg, which back in the 70s, we might not have really thought that much of being an Easter egg.
Right.
But for some particular reason, about 20, 25 minutes in the flight, Paul, which is the name of the character that Bill's playing, gets up, wanders over to a window seat, and opens the window seat and stares outside.
Twilight Zone moment.
Exactly, completely. When I actually did a video on Horror at 30,000 Feet, for those of you who haven't seen it, it's on Made for TV. You can
Yep.
find it on YouTube. I actually intercut what Shatner saw in the Twilight Zone with him looking at the window, looking out the window or whatever.
Yep.
Um, but it was obvious that that one little scene was thrown in to, as a gimmick by whoever it was that directed the picture. And Shatner just rolled with it. He
Yeah.
never, look at the incredible backlash that happened during, the Get a Life situation
Yeah.
on Saturday Night Live. They wrote the story. He didn't write the story,
Right.
but he never really backed away from looking at his career in jest whenever he needed to.
Right. Absolutely agree.
I'm not sure that that is something, and I have an utmost respect for this gentleman, but I don't think that's something I've ever seen Patrick Stewart interested in doing. I
Right.
don't think I've ever seen him lampoon a version of Picard,
Right.
or an overemphasized caricature of Picard. And I think that's probably because, unlike Kirk, unlike Shatner, I think that Kirk was born from Shatner.
Yep.
I think that I think that Patrick Stewart feels an enormous amount of respect
Yep.
and deference for the character.
I was thinking the same thing, Jim. I think there's a difference there between exactly what you're saying. Difference there between the actor that created the role of Kirk versus who's hey, if anybody has a right to parody it, it's got to be the guy that created it.
Right.
versus somebody like Patrick Stewart, who has such reverence for the character, original character, that he doesn't dare, make light of it or to
Yeah.
parody it. So,
Yeah. And I don't think I've ever seen him do that in any of the properties. The X-Men movies is Professor X. I mean, or when he had to come back in Logan, he really didn't. I mean, he was excited to come back in Logan
yes,
because he got to do something he didn't do in X-Men, and that's the exact same reason how they lured him back to Picard. I don't
yep,
want to do what I did before. I've done that
yep.
already. I want to do something new. But any time that he has revisited a character in his past, he always has treated it with reverence.
Yes. One of the earliest roles I've ever seen Patrick Stewart do was John Borman's Excalibur. He played Leon deGrasse in Excalibur. And man, you talk about a totally different role from, Picard. If anybody hasn't seen that, you should go back and watch the movie Excalibur. And it's not a very big part. He has 2 or 3 scenes in that movie, but at one point before Arthur becomes who he is, he helps Leon deGrasse, as his castle's being attacked, and Patrick Stewart does a wonderful job in that role.
Yeah, he was Gurney Halleck in De Laurentiis's Dune back, comic.
Yes.
I remember Excalibur. I think Excalibur was the last movie released in the movie theaters with an intermission in it.
I think you're right.
Anything after that.
Yes.
And of course, he also very briefly appeared in Life Force.
You know what? I'll have to go back and watch that. I kind of seem to remember that.
Yeah, because it was in it's set. They come back to London or whatever, and there's a very brief scene with him in it, and obviously nothing to write home about.
No, but it's
And most people probably will not remember he's in Life Force because that's not probably the thing you remember the most about Life Force. But we're not going to go there. This is a PG-rated show, as they say.
Yes, exactly, and I totally agree. We'll just leave it at that.
Brutalist in theaters now. Okay. The Brutalist in theaters now. Because it would be brutal to sit through, I guess. And something somebody else didn't bring up until Michael just brought that to my attention, though. But yeah, they still have intermissions in plays.
Yes.
And I go to see something at TPAC here in Nashville, a Fan of the Opera, theater, stuff like that. So they still have them there. And I never even thought about that until Michael just mentioned that a movie still had it.
Yep. Between the acts of a play, typically they'll have an intermission. Yeah. Look at the lighting behind Spock. Look at that lavender. And that's all done through the lighting, too. That's not the gel lights. That's not painted. That's done through the gel lights.
Yep.
Just amazing.
Yeah, he was. He was. The cinematographer was amazing. Finnerman, right? Gerald
Finnerman. Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree with that. James, that's first time I saw Life Force. That was an eye opener, more or less.
Yeah.
So.
No, it had actually even been done one other time. There was another time, Planet of the Vampires, I think it was called. And I want to say John Saxon played the lead in that one.
I think you might be right. Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think they're both versions of a classic science fiction story by somebody or something that was in Amazing Stories in the 50s or 60s.
Yeah.
So many of the early stuff, The Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price. With Charlton Heston, and then about 40 years later, I Am Legend with Will Smith are all basically based off Robert Bloch's I Am Legend.
Yep. Well, I hadn't seen The Last Man on Earth till a few years ago, and I grew up with the Omega Man and that, and I was blown away by that version by Vincent Price. that done back in the 50s like that, early 60s. I can't recall which, but
Far truer than Mega. I mean, I thought what they did
yeah,
with Mega Man, I thought that was perfect because we were, you're now in 2001: A Space Odyssey. You're now in some pretty heavy hitting science fiction time
you're right.
when they made that, the Planet of
Yeah,
the Apes movies and everything else. So I think that they reimagined it very
right.
well. Matter of fact, if they ever remake it, they'll probably remake it at using his story as a backline.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But the Vincent Price version, exceptionally close
Yes,
to the original. With
yes,
his friend calling to him from outside.
yep.
And if you
Uh,
guys have not read any of Robert Bloch's stuff, or what's the other guy?
um, shoot.
He wrote Hell House.
Oh golly, yeah.
The last name. Last name begins with an M. Richard Matheson, thank
Math,
you so much.
math,
You read my mind, James.
James. Yes, Matheson. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. If you haven't read any Matheson books, you got to read them. Go out, get them on Kindle, get them at a library. You
Yeah.
need to read you need to read several Matheson books. There are
Yes.
certain books in our history, literary wise, for us, for let's call Gen 1, okay, that they're larger than life. Not
Yes.
because of the stories, but because of the stories and the authors that wrote them.
Right.
All of the best books that we think of for Robert Heinlein were his young adult juvenile series.
Right.
Strange in a Strange Land, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. He wrote some incredibly good stuff. One of the last things he wrote, Friday, but even more importantly, The Lives of Lazarus Long, where he introduced the multiverse
Right.
decades before anybody else even thought about that.
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely.
Absolutely amazing. Arthur C. Clarke with Childhood's End.
Childhood's End. Yes. Exactly.
At Childhood's End, and then later on his Rama Rendezvous with Rama series.
Yep.
That series of books, to me, represented Arthur C. Clarke's pinnacle of writing.
Right.
Asimov, oh my God,
Yep. Right.
Foundation, and and the set and the Three Laws of Robotics.
Yep.
Um, that man wrote like 600 books.
Oh
He wrote
yeah.
fiction, nonfiction. There were multiple autobiographies. I think one of them he wrote was called In Memory Yet Green. Um, Frank Herbert for Dune.
Yep.
Um, I've read other Frank Herbert things, not all that pleased with them. But
Yeah.
Dune was done very well. His son James, that took them over, is a horror novelist, and he's exceeded in his own way.
Yes. Absolutely.
Stephen King's son has done the same thing.
Yeah.
This is terrible. I can't think of his name right now. But they've
We're
even
getting old,
worked
Jim.
together. No, they worked together in like 2 or 3 novels, and they use Stephen's name, and then Joe Hill. Joe Hill is the name that Stephen King's son goes with, and he did it for 2 reasons that I didn't even realize. And they're probably both good ideas. One is he didn't want people to think of him as Stephen King's son,
Right.
and two, and I didn't realize this, but his mother Tabitha King was also a best-selling author.
Wow.
I never read anything by her. I'm assuming she didn't write horror.
Oh,
But I didn't know. So he just felt that when it was his time, he needed to go independently of that name, which ironically is the same thing that Stephen did like 10 years earlier with Richard Bachman, just to determine, is it really the stories I'm writing, or is it just the name that now buy these books? And I think the Bachman books, you want to talk about a vote of confidence. The way that we all reacted when we found out that Richard Bachman was Stephen King, probably exceeded his wildest dreams.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. It's the worlds he creates. It was not just who he was.
Right.
He had a hard time coping with drugs and alcohol in those years. And I think that's, pastor, right? That one played into it. Let's see some of the things I've been ignoring you guys on. No, you're good. You are extremely lucky, James, that Harlan Ellison is dead. That right there, that right there
Yep.
is like probably one of the worst things that you could say around Harlan Ellison people.
Uh-huh.
And he's likely to dig himself up out of the ground tonight to hunt you down and kill you right now. You may be right, but that doesn't change it at all.
Yep.
Man, I love you guys. You guys are just, it's just,
Genius.
manly, the genius of the masters was revealed in late age when they tied together all their work, showcasing absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely too.
I mean, well, my word, you got the, like we were, we talked about Heinlein's Lives of Lazarus Stone.
Yep.
Stephen King in the Dark Tower series, the Gunslinger series. Probably the best writing he ever did all the way through his life.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
He has some, if you've never read the latter four, the first three were published when he was very young. The first one, The Gunslinger, was the first book he ever wrote. He's 19 years old.
Yeah.
At the end of the last four, he has an afterwards, which is basically him and his 19-year-old self discussing the characters and the things that have happened. It's just absolutely amazing. So he points out, that it was his first stuff and everything. And he also, I think in the second book, is where he really spends a lot of time talking about the accident when he got hit by the van in Maine. Right. And how it was the kind of thing that should have killed him. But at the same time, it straightened him. He was able to kick all the drugs and substance abuse and everything in the recovery from that. And I think he even mentions in there, that, oh, by the way, don't feel too bad because he did go out and buy the van. The guy who drove it was not at fault. It just crappy weather. But he did buy the van and beat the living crap out of it, I think he said.
Wow.
Sigma, I hope we're here until the next millennium would actually be kind of good.
Yeah.
Centennial Man by Isaac Asimov. Omega Man is pure 70s from the 8 tracks to Heston with his shirt. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I love that where he pops the 8-track in. Man, you don't see that anymore.
Manley goes, I would have put Stephen Tabb's pics on the cover of my book. Brought to you by. Yeah.
They helped write it. I've been sitting here wondering why Charlie decides to change because he was in the gold Where No Man's Gone Before shirt earlier, but then now he's changed back to the clothes that he had on, I believe, when they took him aboard. He's got that wraparound leather looking jacket or whatever it is on. So
uniform continuity was not one of their strong points.
Yeah, no. That's a good point. Charlie goes from simply immature to very dark and cruel. He must learn quickly.
Think about it, though. If you think about it, isn't that exactly what a teenager does in puberty?
Yeah.
I mean,
that's true.
You enter into every relationship with hope and wonder.
Yep.
But if you get hurt, you instantly turn dark and cruel.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
It's part of the growing up syndrome. And some of us get it much worse than others. I mean, we all went to school. You know the people who, you grew up with them. You know the people who fixated on that dark and cruel. And then there was everybody else who learned how to handle their negative emotions and to better themselves with it. That right there is a really good testament to the writing of the story. I never really thought about it. Until you mentioned it, Red Shirt, never even thought about it. But it's perfect. Scary.
Before we get,
hi, Tori, glad to see you.
Hey, Tori.
I've seen your avatar before. I know you've been in the comments. You may have previously joined us on live streams, and if you have, welcome back. If you haven't, what took you so long? But it's good to see you. Very good to see you.
Yes, very good to see you, Tori. Coming up here. There's the scene with the not Telosians. I can't remember their name now. That come back to get Charlie, and they had that glowing ship, and because they showed it on the view screen. I'm not sure if the remaster shows the same ship or if they redid those graphics or not. But that glowing ship kind of reminded me of the Leif Erikson glowing model a little bit. I mean, that whole concept of the glowing spaceship, it doesn't look anything like it, but it's a really neat design when you see it in the original effects. So just kind of I wonder if thought of that because it's kind of an interesting design. So
I like your comment, James. I'm sure there's a conversation between Shatner and Roddenberry where Shatner goes, "You want me to do what?"
The rest of the season, yeah. His gunslinger jacket.
I think it is. And actually, Tori, you bring up a really good point that we don't talk about very much on these live streams, but I have talked about in some of the analysis that I've done. The guest stars each week are paid second only to Shatner.
To Shatner, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So whereas even Nimoy, especially in first season, maybe he got $1,500 a week. I'm just drawing that number out of the top of my head. It's in the ballpark back then. But they would get between 2 and 3. So yes, this episode in particular, definitely a showcase for Robert Walker.
Yep.
And if you could carry this kind of performance off the first time somebody asked you to do it, very young, like in the case of Robert Walker, yep, then at least, especially back in the 60s and 70s, your career was set. I mean, you may never pick up an Oscar, but George, I can't think of his name right now. Crap. Was in Rabid. He was in all the airport movies, played mechanic.
Oh, Kennedy?
George Kennedy. Yeah, exactly. I mean, once you proved yourself in one performance, you became one of the go-to people. And everybody else would and that separated, as crazy as it sounds, you never really think of the guest stars as being famous. They made a lot of money floating from show to show because they could. And a lot of actors couldn't. Yeah, it's like, oh, you get your 15 minutes of fame, or they play the part as themselves.
Right.
And when they get into another show, it doesn't feel the same.
There's one guest star who made more than Shatner, and I know you know this because we've talked about this in the episode Lazarus, in the episode of The Alternative Factor. Robert Brown. Roddenberry had to scramble and find somebody to replace Barrymore, who didn't show up.
Yeah.
And so he tried to get Robert Brown. Robert Brown said, "I'll do it." He goes, "But I want to make more. I want to be paid more than Shatner." And so Roddenberry says, "Well, I'll give you this much money," which is what, Shatner made. And then he pulls out his wallet, gives him $5, and he goes, "Here." He goes, "Now you're paid more than Shatner." He goes, "But don't tell Shatner that you made more."
Do not tell Bill.
Yeah. Because I saw that in an interview or something with Robert Brown at one point. He tells that story,
I would bet, in all honesty, I mean, it's $5, so it's not like he went to hell for it, but I would bet that was a contract violation.
Oh, I'm sure it was. But
so many Manly, you are 100% correct. Ding, 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 give the man a cookie. That's exactly the way that I remember we were getting ready to watch all of the Irwin Allen disaster movies.
Yeah.
And just before my wife and I watched them for the first time together, we had recently watched The Changeling, not Star Trek, but George C. Scott, 1982. And of course, Exorcist 3. So we got ready to watch, I think, the first, whichever the first movie was that we watched of his, of Irwin Allen's. And I told her, I said, when the first time that we saw George Kennedy, I said, this was television's version of George C. Scott. Because
Yep.
George C. Scott, he was nominated for an Oscar as Patton, might even won it. I'm not sure, but I mean, very talented, very A-list actor.
Yep.
George Kennedy, every bit as good, but completely at home and pretty much owned the television genre back then.
Yes. Yes. Yes, I think you're right. Yeah.
Like a George
On a weekend.
Airport Kennedy is I'll get it right here. I keep screwing around. We have George C. Scott at home. Expound on that, if you would, please.
Yeah.
Very first film I saw was Towering Inferno, 1974. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I remember him from Airport. Yeah, he plays what, Joe Patrone or Patroni, the head mechanic or whatever. Yeah.
I think he was in Earthquake as well with Hess.
Yes, I think he was. Well, not sure.
I know one of the things that I found out when doing some research into Irwin Allen was that people like, and somebody else mentioned it too, like Ernest Borgnine. Kennedy is also the Tim Ernest Borgnine. Yep. There were people like that showed up in like the Poseidon Adventure and stuff like that because, Shelley Winters, Red Buttons, they were filling out their contracts that he signed them up front to a multiple picture deal. The idea being that their compensation was set out in advance and therefore could be more, because remember, these were being released in the movie theaters, but he was a television dude up to this point. He made the jump that Roddenberry was never able to make in the 1970s commercially. And so he was very aware of budgets and limitations and stuff. So, it's like I was doing some background research on the Poseidon Adventure, and I think it's Jack Albertson. Because he plays Shelley when his husband.
Yep.
I think it was mentioned in one of the things I was reading that the only reason he was in the movie because he'd just done Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and he was going to go on, with Chico and the Man. But this was the last movie. This was the last one he was required to do. Right. And so he signed on for the Poseidon Adventure. And then, if he was to work with him again, which I think he actually did, but then it was one off. Like a regular Hollywood movie star.
Right.
187, you're absolutely right. I actually saw Earthquake and Sense Around too. And if those of you, even today, when we talk about, we have surround sound. Let me tell you about Sense Around. They sat you in a normal theater and they put giant speakers along all the walls. Yeah. I'm a little kid. I was this is 10 years old at the time. And the first part of the movie, it's loud, but you don't really feel that much of a difference. And then there's that scene where the elevator comes up from the dam, opens up and floods out everything, and they realize the dam is cracked at the bottom. Right. When that water rushed out, it scared the living crap out of me because the entire room shook as if it was literally on the floor with us. Right. I've never experienced that since. So I think Sense Around obviously is a gimmick. William Castle probably was upset he didn't use it.
Yes, exactly.
But I remember that. And so when, in 1987, when you talk about, I saw it in Sense Around, that's one of those flashback moments. I'm right there with you. I remember that too.
Yeah, but then again, they didn't have, William Castle had the flying skeletons from House on Haunted Hill.
Yep.
Everybody didn't have, so.
I was trying to, I actually ended up finding out two pieces of trivia at the same time. I was trying to figure out what his 13th movie was because he did 13 of these movies.
Yeah.
And I kept hitting a brick wall. But I also was tracking down a movie called The Spirit is Willing, which was made in the late 1960s, early 1970s. It was a comedy about ghosts in a house. So it was sort of almost like a imagine the Ghost of Mrs. Muir as a comedy,
Right.
but isn't just the captain. There's a whole bunch of people in the house that have been killed by different people, and love affairs and stuff. Played all off as a comedy. It turns out that The Spirited Willing is the 13th William Castle and the only comedy he ever directed.
Did he do? I'm trying to remember. Did he do the 13 Ghosts or not?
He did the original. Castle? Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. I thought it was. Yeah.
Yeah, he did 13 Ghosts. I think he did the original House on Haunted Hill.
Yes, he did. Yep.
With Vincent Price. 13 Ghosts was good. It was. I like when they remade the House on Haunted Hill and when they remade 13 Ghosts with Tony Shalhoub.
Yep.
They updated the stories to be more in our era, and they were good. But I do recommend you go back and watch the original.
Yes. Yeah.
It's nice to experience something different.
Didn't Jeffrey Rush play Vincent Price's character in the remake of House on Haunted Hill?
Yeah, and actually his last name, the character's name was Price.
Price, yes.
Yeah, exactly. As a tribute. I loved the beginning of him taking these, showing off his new theme ride where they get on the elevator, go up to get onto the roller coaster, and then it's like, congratulations. It was in a simulation thing. It was very, very well done.
Yes.
Even in the theater, he says. Okay.
The castle.
We are just we're pretty much winding down. It is 1:11, which is good. I mean, we started a little late. So I'm going to go ahead and get ready to sign off with you guys. Thank you all for coming and joining us. We absolutely love it when you can. I will give you my doggy Dax. I have to introduce Dax to you guys by holding her up sometime. She is a absurdly small mini dachshund, 8 pounds. We're working on a call-in feature that will be, if not in the next live stream, one of the ones right after that, which is basically going to allow you to do what you do when you listen to a radio talk show or an SXM show at home and you want to participate. I will put a phone number up on this screen and you will dial in. And because you're talking on a regular plain old telephone, there's no computers, there's no software involved. You do not have to even use your real name, which for some people might not be a bad idea. And you'll come through the speakers and you can, even though we can't see you, you'll be able to comment also on the live streams and what your thoughts were. Yep. We'll figure it out after we do it the first time. Maybe the first time we'll do it, we'll let somebody stay on as long as they want. And then maybe if it proves to be popular, we'll run people for maybe 5 minutes at a time or something and stick in a queue just like a radio station does. Then if nobody dials in, we'll just forget I even mentioned it. But hey, anything is possible.
Absolutely.
All right, everybody, live long and prosper. God bless each and every one of you, and I look forward to seeing you again soon here on the channel.
Take care, everyone.